Hi Nathan, can you see and hear in the chamber?
Can I just check and make sure you're able to hear me?
Nathan, yeah, I can hear you.
Well, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending this meeting of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee on Wednesday, the 6th of July, 2022. I'm sure, hopefully, it will be a day that we'll all remember. Before we begin, can I outline some housekeeping rules? There are no fire alarms planned, so if the alarm sounds, please leave via the emergency doors. Toilets are outside and to the left of this room. Can you please ensure all your phones are kept on silent or switched off, as mine is. This meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube page, and can I thank those members that have come off the committee for their service over the past 12 months, and can I welcome the new committee members to this committee, and look forward to seeing you in some subcommittees over the next 12 months. Straight off to the agenda, apologies. I have apologies from Councillor Gordon France, Margaret France and Alan Platt. Is there any other apologies? Tommy Gray?
Yes, Chair, apologies were received from Councillor Gray, who's deputising for the Mayor this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies from Michelle Marinelle, she's having medical issues.
Okay. Declarations of any interest. Members are reminded of their responsibility to declare any pecuniary interest in respect of matters contained in this agenda. Do we have any declarations of interest? None received. Please do make me aware of any should you need to do so through the agenda. Public questions. No questions have been received in advance of this meeting. If any public are present, which there now isn't, so we don't need to ask that. Minutes of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee. I will take items 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11 all together. Is there any issue with any of the minutes? No comments? Can I have a proposer? I'll take a Sina and a seconder. Jean. All in favour? Excellent. Item 12, consideration of criteria for the allocation of a new Hackney carriage vehicle licence. Can I ask Nathan to present his report?
Good evening. Hopefully, if somebody could just confirm that I'm able to be heard, that'd be appreciated.
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just an apology from me just to start with. Appearing in this way, normally I'd appear before the committee in person. Obviously, I'm having some of my own medical issues, which necessitates me appearing virtually. I just want to echo the welcome to the new committee members that the chair expressed. Hopefully, you'll find licensing to be an interesting and an engaging topic. I'll jump straight into the report then. As the Chair said, this is the consideration of criteria for the allocation of a new Hackney Carriage vehicle licence. The purpose of the report is for members to consider, approve and adopt the criteria for the allocation of a new licence as council policy. The recommendations of the report is that the committee give due consideration to it, approve the criteria for a new licence. Further to that, the authority is delegated to the Director of Planning and Development to carry out the administrative process of inviting applications of interest to be made and for applications to be brought before the next LPSC for selection by the tombola method in accordance with the criteria. The final recommendation is that the criteria is approved as the Council's policy and appended to the main policy document as Appendix 5, with the authority being delegated to the Director, the same Director, to make amendments to the criteria as and when required. But for those amendments to only be made in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee. The reasons for these recommendations is the criteria gives all interested parties a fair and open way of being considered for a licence, and it clearly sets out the Council's procedure. This criteria also ensures that the travelling public are given the best service by a modern vehicle, which also increases the Council's wheelchair accessible vehicle provision. The procedure has been used in previous years and has been felt to be an appropriate way of administering the process of granting a new vehicle licence. There was another option considered that's been rejected. The Council could decide not to adopt the criteria as policy. It's not favourable as it slows the administrative process by requiring the criteria to be set each time a new licence is available to be granted. I'll move to paragraph 9 of the report. That sets out, in accordance with section 16 of the Transport Act 1985, the Council limits the number of Hackney carriages in respect of which licences are granted, and that's limited to 36 licences. Following the expiry of the vehicle licence HUV 0001, the Council currently has only 35 vehicle licences, which leaves one licence available to be granted. The Council has not issued a new Hackney carriage licence since 2017, where it adopted criteria in an ad hoc way to administer the process of a single licence. There's a significant intrinsic value associated with the holding of a Hackney carriage vehicle licence in a controlled district where the numbers are limited, and so it's appropriate that the Council employs a fair and open method of determining who should be allocated the licence, provided they meet the criteria which is set. Moving to paragraph 12, that sets out that the criteria which is being considered today is appended at Appendix 1. The criteria is largely the same as applied in 2017, again in 2010 and in 2008. So it's on each occasion that a licence has been, a new Hackney carriage vehicle licence has been issued, the criteria has been largely the same. It's proposed to adopt this criteria as council policy so that when any Hackney carriage vehicle licence becomes available, there's a set and defined criteria to be applied. And having that criteria as part of council policy means that administrative process of allocating these licences is smoother, and prospective applicants are aware of what that procedure is in advance. Criteria sets out that in order to be considered, the vehicle must be a wheelchair accessible vehicle. This will increase the provision of wheelchair accessible vehicles in the Hackney carriage fleet, as the licence which expired was not a wheelchair accessible vehicle. It also sets out the nature of the person who is to be invited to submit an expression of interest, the length of time they would have expected to have been licensed for, and other matters. There's nothing in this report which impacts on the council's green agenda, and the criteria will see that any new Hackney carriage vehicle licence is for a WAV, increasing that supply of wheelchair, which is obviously relevant to equality and diversity in the borough. In terms of risk, there is a reputational risk to the council of not having a defined criteria for the allocation of licences. Again, as has been mentioned in the report, there's an administrative process which will be slowed if we didn't adopt the criteria as policy. At paragraph 18, 19, 20, 21, there are the comments of the monitoring officer, which are relevant for the purposes. That's the report, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions which the committee may have.
Thank you, Nathan. Just before we go to the debate, Nathan referred to, we've done this in the past. It did work very well. So we had an open and transparent procedure. It was videoed so that obviously no untoward accusations could be made. So it is an efficient way of dealing with any numerous applications for one licence. I don't see any issue within the policy other than the green agenda, which I'm sure Councillor Clifford is itching to discuss. So I will ask Councillor Clifford for his question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can see paragraph 16 under equality and diversity that the criteria, will be met because it's going to be a wheelchair accessible vehicle. But paragraph 15, climate change and air quality, the work noted in this report does not impact the climate change and sustainability targets of the Council's green agenda. To me, as the Council's member responsible for environment and green space, I will declare that is not acceptable. We have always said business cannot carry on as normal as part of our green agenda. I can see under paragraph 10, the last licence, similar licence to have changed was 2017. So these don't come up very often. Now, back in 2017, there wasn't many zero emission vehicles that I would say were suitable for taxis. These days, there are plenty out there on the market. Now is the time to add that. We're going from 35 to 36. Number 36, as well as being wheelchair accessible, should also be a zero emission vehicle to actually fit in with the Council's green agenda that we set. It should not be allowed to go ahead without that point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Clifford. I'll let Nathan answer that. Just to be clear, you can have a vehicle that runs on fuel which is carbon neutral, because there is a specific fuel station in Chorley that advertises all its fuel is carbon neutral, even though it's petrol or diesel. So I would argue that you can put fuel in because that company is offsetting its own carbon neutrality. Anyway, Nathan, open to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was something which was considered at the time. Now, Councillor Clifford, you are right. There are sort of ultra low emission vehicles available on the market. There is a very, very significant cost outlay in association with or associated with those vehicles, and I mentioned that just as it's a relevant consideration for this committee. It is open to the committee to make any sort of changes that they wish to this criteria, but obviously that is a relevant factor that would have to be considered.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Beaver and then Councillor Khan.
Yeah, just two things really. You mentioned about this a company with carbon neutral. Why do I get the feeling that they're selling it in Chorley and the trees that they're planting are in Nottinghamshire? Now, it's possible that you could get a vehicle. The ones in London now, the new black cabs, are electric. Now, I've spoken with a few taxi drivers in London. They're something like £66,000. So they're not cheap. However, the council is being held to account on a daily basis to what are you doing towards the green agenda. And I think it's not unfair for us to branch into transport, because we're being held to account about our vehicles, the council's vehicles, how many electric, and we are going that way. Is it unfair to ask people who work for the councils to do the same? And just a final question. Whose is the Hackney licence? If it's ours and we're going to issue it, am I right in thinking, and I'll stand to be corrected, that these can be sold on from taxi driver to taxi driver? and we don't get a penny, and yet we're giving it for free. Thank you.
Nathan?
I'll deal with the second point first, if I may, Chair. I think the first point more is a question for debate. In terms of the licence, the council is empowered to set the criteria under which it will decide to grant a licence. Now, these licences, it's not like there is a stack of licences which are ready to be handed out or which are owned by anyone. It's simply that the council has the power to allow an activity to grant a licence to allow an activity to happen. So the decision at hand is what the criteria is that we will consider when deciding whether we will grant a licence. So we're basically saying, if you make an application in this type of in this prescribed way that we're setting, then we will consider whether to then grant you the licence. Now, in terms of selling, in terms of the fees associated, there is a fee associated with an application. The council's not entitled to, or not permitted, I should say, curry a profit from that licence fee. It should be the administrative process of, processing the licence application. But there is a fee associated with granting a new licence. I think there was another point that you made, Councillor Beaver, if you could just remind me.
I think you're referring to the black cabs of London, specifying that it has to be of a black cab electric vehicle. It does have an engine on there, but that is purely to charge something within the vehicle. Is that to what you were referring?
I suppose it's a matter for the committee to determine. Obviously, there are particular advantages of operating vehicles in London. There's a significant difference in the terms of, or in size of the economy in London versus in Chorley. There's a huge number of vehicles in London. The taxi licensing regime is and should be a local regime. So, whatever is considered to be necessarily correct for London isn't necessarily correct for Chorley. And likewise, what's correct for Chorley might not be right for other boroughs. So I suppose it's just a comment, really. That I mentioned before that there is an enormous cost outlay for this, and I suppose members are already aware of the existing difficulty in attracting drivers into the trade, and it could be considered a barrier if the committee were to decide that. But again, it's perfectly legitimate for the council to decide, or the committee rather, to decide that that's a requirement they would want to make.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. The first one being, if we are going to go down the route of the tombola, as previously done a couple of times, but I remember in my early days as a councillor, there was an interview process as well, which I'd like to see brought forward, an interview process before they go into a tombola. There's a number of reasons for that, and one of them is I'd like to see that these drivers or the applicants do understand the disability laws, because recently we've had a number of complaints, well, I have anyway, that some of the drivers refuse to take wheelchairs, dogs, and I have serious concern that they don't have the understanding. It's all right ticking A, B and C, but do they actually have the understanding? So I'd like to see an interview process. I don't know how you guys feel. Then you can hear what the applicants have got to say and what their understanding is. I think it's very important. The last two times wasn't done, but the initial one I remember was about 2000, maybe 7 or 6. There was a number of plates issued, and that was an interview process, and I think that worked very well. The other concern is that, do we have any control over when money changes hands, when they sell these plates in the community? They are worth up to £35,000. You're trying to tell me that we don't have any control after issuing them for no cost whatsoever? Thank you.
Nathan?
Thanks, Chair. I suppose the criteria that's been set out tries to ensure that the license which is eventually issued is granted to I suppose the type of person that will ensure that they will carry wheelchair users, they will carry disabled passengers. There's clearly legislation already in force which requires wheelchair users to be carried in wheelchair accessible vehicles, and there are offences which the council will investigate if we're made aware of those. There's recently been new legislation brought in which widens that duty on the drivers of vehicles to carry to carry wheelchair to carry disabled passengers rather than specifically wheelchair users, and that creates new offences again to fail to comply with that duty. The criteria does state that the driver should have been somebody who has been licensed for 5 years prior. Now, obviously, the council requires any applicant for a new driver license to undertake and pass the council's knowledge test. So they must sit and pass that knowledge test before they're even granted a driver license, and that includes topographical knowledge of Chorley. It includes our council policy and conditions attached to licenses, and it also includes disability awareness. So I hope that goes some way to satisfying that concern, Councillor Khan. But again, even once that person has been granted a driver licence, the criteria that we're proposing this evening would require somebody to have been licensed for 5 years to ensure that person is sufficiently experienced and understands the role of the taxi driver when operating these types of vehicles. In terms of the control, what the legislation requires us to do is grant the license. Once the license is granted, it's open to a driver, or rather a vehicle proprietor, to transfer that license, and that process is simply a notification process. It doesn't allow the council to take a view on it, provided they comply with that application process. Now, what we've said in the criteria is that we would expect the person applying or submitting an expression of interest to use that vehicle personally within Chorley for a minimum of 12 months, and we're going to require applicants to declare that on their application. Now, if that license is then transferred within that 12 months or sooner than 12 months, then enforcement action could follow that, and that's to try and make sure that the applicant, when they're applying for it, they're not just trying to garner some kind of commercial advantage. They're genuinely interested in the operation of a Hackney vehicle in Chorley. Thanks, Chair.
Nathan, it may well be just worth clarifying, as it is a Hackney vehicle and it will be driven by a Hackney licence holder, about refusal of fares and that they're not allowed to do it. Therefore, if anybody requests a vehicle, then they should not be refusing it, should they?
Yeah, exactly as you say, Chair. Anybody who, if a Hackney carriage is applying for hire or standing for hire on a rank, they're attempted to be hired, then unless they have a reasonable excuse to not accept that hire, then by failing to accept it, they commit an offence, as you say.
Thank you. Councillor Clifford, Councillor Sherwood, and then Councillor Beaver.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I've mentioned the green agenda and the zero emission vehicle that I believe should be stipulated by this committee. I've just heard Nathan mention that the licence is expected to be held for 12 months. Now, 12 months goes very quickly. As it's been heard from Councillor Khan, that they can be worth up to £35,000, these licences. Nathan mentioned earlier the extra expense of a net zero vehicle, which is coming down all the time. There are some very good vehicles out there now at reasonable prices. So because I feel very, very strongly about this, that the 36th licence that we'd be granting here, I would like to propose to this committee that we stipulate the vehicle must be net zero as well as wheelchair accessible. Thank you, Chair.
What I would say about that is we do a lot of work with the trade, and when it comes to carbon neutral vehicles, I think we have to consult with the trade, because ultimately it is the trade that will bear the cost. I think it's not just about one vehicle. I think there's a wider case that the policy needs to be reviewed so that all vehicles can be implemented over a certain set period, giving everybody the opportunity to make sure that vehicles that they use are appropriate going forward, not just this one. I'd just like to clarify a few points. We're not gaining a taxi here. We've already had a taxi licensed at 36. That has expired. This is just simply approving the criteria to reapply for that. So we're not gaining a taxi as such. As I've said, I have to sit in these meetings, and taxi drivers have been hit massively through COVID, massively, to the point where a lot of them have struggled. And we hear about cost of living crisis. They are currently being hit with fuel costs. Their electricity is going up. Everything is creating a perfect storm for the trade at the moment. What I would ask members to consider is the consequence of decisions. How will it impact that person wanting to apply? As far as I'm concerned, the fact that these people can transfer licence plates, that has been going on for years. That is just how it is. Until national policy changes, we are where we are. However, I think we have to seriously consider the impact, and I would ask members to think about that. I appreciate your comments, Mark, I really do, but I don't think now is the right time to implement this. I think what we need is a larger piece of work about how we go forward and making sure that vehicles are given a date to hit, and all vehicles, not just hackney cabs, but also private hire. But I don't think now is the ideal time. Just wait, Mark. I've got Councillor Sherwood, Councillor Beaver, Councillor Clifford, and then Councillor Khan. Go on. Oh, sorry. I'll stick you on the bottom of that list, Roy.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask you a question, please, Nathan? I'm looking at page 61 at the bottom where it says the criteria. The applicant must be an existing licence holder at the time of the period for submitting expression of interests. And the licence means a hackney carriage or private hire. So on the following page, number 2, expressions of interest cannot be submitted by a person who already holds, whether full or part-time, hackney carriage vehicle. Could you give some clarity to that?
Yes, through you, Chair. The distinction is between being a licensed as a driver and not holding a Hackney Carriage vehicle license. So the criteria is trying to ensure that we have sufficiently experienced drivers, i.e. they've worked in the trade in Chorley for a number of years, but not somebody who already holds a Hackney Carriage vehicle license and is trying to expand their own fleet. It's trying to encourage innovation and bring new people into the Hackney vehicle trade, as it were.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Beaver. Councillor Beaver.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've just realised we're kind of getting carried away with ourselves. For a vehicle to be wheelchair accessible, we're talking pretty much a minibus with a lift-in boot lid where a ramp can come down. And if I'm right in thinking that, I think that is a sufficient restriction in itself. Because, for example, if you have a Kia Ceed, you can't adapt it. For something to be wheelchair adaptable, it has to be bigger. And I would agree with what you said, Chair, about a future project, maybe for a subcommittee. And I think that I would like to propose that the conditions be accepted as they stand. And any future thing about electricity or carbon, whatever, be a subject for a later meeting.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually to come back to, which will be paragraph 9, where it's mentioning 36 licences, paragraph 10, 35. Now, we've heard from the Chair that how taxi drivers have had it awful. Now, we are not forcing a taxi driver, a current taxi driver, who's a Hackney Carriage licence to move to electric. This is a new licence. It is an available licence. So we're not forcing anyone to actually... if you want the 36th licence, you should be fitting in with our green agenda at the Chorley Council. I am not having it that it's a thing for the future. That is just not right. We have to be carbon neutral by 2030 in the borough. At the time, we're in 2022 now, we're halfway through 2022. Now is the time to do this. Unless that is added to it, it is unacceptable. And I've already proposed that we put the net zero vehicle as a criteria. And if it's not, I will not be able to support it.
Can we keep proposals to the end? Because I want to have a debate rather than multiple proposals where once somebody says something else, somebody changes their mind. Let's leave the proposals to the end. Let's have the debate.
Oh, thank you, Chair. It's just, obviously, a lot of people will be interested in this. I imagine any news reporter looking at this and anybody who is really interested in protecting the environment will be looking at this and thinking, do you know what? Councillor Clifford's right. This is the time to do it. If not now, when? I do not believe in kicking things into the long grass. If you don't want to apply for the 36th licence because it's got a net zero vehicle criteria, don't apply. We're not forcing you to apply to it, just don't apply. But if you're willing to do it, then welcome, because that's what we need to be doing. We need to be moving greener in Chorley, not doing things as we used to do. It's the end of business as usual. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question for Nathan. This particular licence plate, was it on a vehicle and was it operational before it ran out, or has it been on standstill?
Nathan, just before you answer, I'm not prepared to discuss how this licence has come about. I think the item in the agenda is about the criteria for future licences to be issued. I think how this has got here.
No, that's
is
not
a
what
separate...
that wasn't my question, Chair. What I meant to say was, was that vehicle in use? That there was a 36 on the right is what I was asking basically. That was my question.
Right.
If I finished.
Nathan, do you want to answer that?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Collins. Yeah, there was an existing licence. Now, the numbering system has become slightly out of sync because older licences have expired and they've been granted new. So it wasn't Hackney licence 36, but there was a 36th licence in existence. Yes, that's right.
Councillor Lees, I keep forgetting to press my button.
Hang on. Thank you, Chair. My question is obviously the licence is given to the vehicle, not to the vehicle driver. Yep. So if a vehicle driver has a taxi and he's got a licence for that taxi and he decides to get a new taxi, to get a new vehicle, that will be a new licence, but it will be forfeiting, he'll be changing the licence over. What would happen to that licence? And if he has to go on the green agenda, then that licence must be zero carbon, or else the 36 one would have an appeal.
I'll let you answer that, Nathan, because I'm still trying to catch up with it.
Well,
I think I got it, Councillor Lees. Sorry. So are you saying if an existing licence holder wanted to change their
change the vehicle?
Hackney vehicle licence holder wanted to change their vehicle, but under the same licence effectively. Is that the question?
Would he not have to get a new licence for that vehicle?
Yes. So what the council procedure allows is where somebody wants to upgrade or change their vehicle, they can apply for a new licence, but at that stage, or from the time the new licence is granted for the new vehicle, they then surrender the existing licence, so that doesn't exist anymore effectively. So they have a new licence for the new vehicle, and the old one lapses on the grant of that new one.
So what we're saying is that anybody who does that would have to fall in line with this criteria.
Not the way the criteria is written currently. This is about the allocation of entirely new licences. So this came about because an existing licence expired and in effect doesn't exist anymore. This criteria wouldn't affect those existing licences.
Well, can I ask you, legal, what would the position be if the person who buys the 36th licence and has to go along with it, and then in a year's time somebody forfeits the other one and gets a new vehicle? Why won't he have to match this criteria?
Thank you, Chair. This is a brand new criteria for the allocation of new Hackney carriage licences. Yeah. So from what I understood, what Nathan was saying was, if it's a licence which is being, from what I can understand, is transferred across, then obviously that would just transfer across in terms of the actual vehicle. But this actual criteria is for the actual allocation of a new Hackney carriage vehicle licence. Yes.
Yeah. But if a driver has a vehicle with an individual Hackney carriage licence, that licence applies to that vehicle. If the driver decides to change the vehicle, he forfeits that licence and he applies for a new licence instead. That's the way I'm seeing it. And if he's applying for a new licence, then why should that new licence be different to this criteria?
Nathan, could you intervene?
Sorry, let me, through you, Chair, if I can jump in there. In effect, what the council's policy allows is for, I suppose the best way to describe it is grandfather rights. The person who is changing their vehicle is entitled to maintain that license in a sort of similar way that they applied for it originally. This criteria then is for brand new vehicles which haven't or don't have an existing license, or the person hasn't been licensed before, and sets the way or the criteria in which the council will consider applications favourably.
So basically what we're
Does
saying...
that answer your question, Councillor?
Yeah, so what we're basically saying is that if the council bring in rules regarding carbon emission that we're intending to go to, if somebody has grandfather rights, they don't have to abide by it.
Well, the council already has existing standards for the actual sort of the criteria for which, or the criteria of the vehicle. So we already have existing standards. This is more about when we invite new applications. These are the types of things that we would consider favourably in those applications, so that when license holders have decided they want to apply, put the name in the hat for the license, then that they understand and they know what the criteria is going to be before they put the name in the hat, as it were.
Nathan, just to be clear, whilst this criteria refers to, I think this will clear it up for you, Councillor Lees, while this criteria refers to new Hackney vehicle applications, should there be a change to council policy that would supersede this criteria, i.e. if the policy of the council was to introduce hybrid vehicles by 2030, that would supersede this criteria, would it not?
Yes, I would agree, Chair, yeah. Effectively, the council can set whatever criteria it wishes to at whatever point and make it apply as it wishes.
So whilst this change is for future applications, that is subject to what the policy of the council is at that time.
Yes, I'd agree.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Sherwood.
Thank you, Chair. I have to support Councillor Clifford in his thinking. We do have a green agenda, and green issues do have to take priority in everything we decide in this council. We have a climate emergency. We have a climate emergency now. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. The criteria has been in place since 2017. It's worked very well. The taxi drivers, I assume, are happy with the criteria. For us to put another clause in tonight without discussing it with them, I do not think it's on. And I agree with you that we should, I agree by 2030 we've got to get carbon neutral, etc., etc. But to do it today, we shouldn't be doing it at all. We're a responsible council. We feel this policy works very well at the moment. Nobody's complaining. I've been using taxis now for the last 6 months, and they are superb. I've had, been well pleased with the way the taxi drivers operate. So I will go along with Councillor Beaver and support his proposal.
Councillor Clifford.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question for Nathan, but also really clarification, I suppose, all members may be wondering about. We've heard about grandfather rights. So for the 35 Hackney carriage licence holders at the moment, any new criteria doesn't actually apply. We are talking about the 36th one. So 1 in 36 would have the criteria of a net zero vehicle. Now, is that how I understand it? That those that have a vehicle now, have a Hackney carriage licence, want to change their vehicle, maybe in 6 months' time, maybe 12 months' time, can carry on using petrol, diesel or hybrid, or please, hopefully they move to electric. but it doesn't affect the other 35 Hackney carriage licence holders. It just affects whoever wants to apply for this 36. Thank you.
I think, Nathan, just before you come in on that, the proposal is quite clear. This is not for renewals, this is for new applications. So I think it's quite clear. I'm sure Nathan will agree that it's quite clear. It is for new applications.
Yeah, I suppose in effect, this is almost one step away from the actual application. This is the council setting the criteria to invite applications. So it is in order to be entered into the tombola, we would expect you to abide by this criteria, and that's the only way the provisions of the criteria become engaged. We have a Hackney licence which is available to be granted. We're going to hold a tombola. This is what we will consider in deciding to put your name into the tombola to be in with a chance of being invited to make a formal application for a licence.
Thank you. Right, has anybody got any new comments to add to the day? Councillor Howarth and then Councillor Beaver.
It seems to me what we're discussing here is possibly going to lead to, what shall we say, a modification of council policy. Council policy is to move towards COVID neutrality in 2030. It means that a lot of people in different occupations, different professions are going to have to make changes. For example, building regulations. That's affecting quite a wide range of employers. It seems to me that we've got to start somewhere. Changes have got to be done. It might be unfortunate for certain people, but that's life. Some people are going to have to do it before others. And I think I would support Councillor Clifford on that basis of being consistent with our environmental policy.
Again, don't disagree that that's the way forward. However, I think proper consultation needs to be undertaken with the trade. I think to isolate one new applicant for a Hackney vehicle licence would be extremely unfair. Let's not forget, private hire would not have to do this. They could rock up in a 3 litre, whatever, blowing out diesel if it was deemed as an appropriate vehicle. I think for one Hackney carriage, it is very unfair. However, I will comment that there are a number of hybrid vehicles in the Hackney range. So at the moment, it is being undertaken by drivers anyway. Councillor Beaver.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say what you said in a different way, if we go down this line, we're creating a 2-tier system within the same system. Them that have to do this and the rest that don't. And when I mentioned about black cabs before, I'm saying they were £66,000. An electric one for a minibus is £65,000. So that's not for our debate, but it's just the main thing that we would be creating a 2-tier, and we need, in my opinion, to discuss with the trade that by a certain date we need to hit something. Not today. Thank you.
Councillor Lees, and then I think...
Yeah, well, it's following on from what I was asking before, and what Councillor Beaver just said. A 2-tier system isn't the right way to go. If we're going to, I agree that we're going to go carbon neutral, yeah. You mentioned 2030. Let's bring it forward to 2025, you know, and put it on all the taxes. To make it just for this one, to me, is wrong. Whatever you apply has got to apply for all the taxes. So I'm afraid I've got to be accepting as it is.
I think, I'm just going to sum up really. I think we can all agree that it is a good idea for taxis, buses, public transport to be carbon neutral. I think we can all agree on that. This little change to the policy, however, is not the right vehicle to do that. We need to look at the policy through consultation, not confrontation. I would be interested, Councillor Clifford, having met with the trade and discussed these proposals as the position, what did they say to you?
If you're asking, have I met with the taxi trade, that is not my job. I do not, as the member for the environment, taxi drivers do not tend to contact me. I get contacted by the general public who expect this council to put us on the road to carbon neutrality.
Just for clarity, you haven't met or discussed carbon neutral vehicles with the trade?
And not with the taxi trade, just the general public. Now, if I can just
Thank
be
you.
allowed...
That was the question.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, that's the question. Right. Is there any new comments? No? Right. Can I have proposals, please? Councillor Clifford.
I propose tonight, as this only affects 1 out of the 36 current Hackney carriage licences, that tonight in 2022 we stipulate that the vehicle must be wheelchair accessible and a net zero vehicle. This has no further effect on the other 35, but from this point onwards in 2022, if any of these licences do come up in future, this is why it doesn't punish the trade, it will be that, because they know they need to go to that, but you can't drag it out to 2030, because every bit of carbon put into the atmosphere now
Councillor
is more
Clifford,
carbon.
can we have
So
the proposal?
my proposal is that the criteria states the vehicle must be net zero emission and wheelchair accessible.
Can I have a seconder for that? Right. Can I have an alternative proposal? Councillor Beaver.
I would like to propose that the report as it stands be approved and that consultation be taken at the earliest opportunity. If that's tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, then so be it, with the trade to discuss how we can do this.
So we'll take Councillor Clifford's proposal first. All in favour of Councillor Clifford's proposal? All against? Any abstentions? No. Right, okay. So I'll take the second proposal, which is Councillor Beaver's. All in favour? Against? Any abstentions? Therefore, that motion is carried. I have no further business. Certainly a lively debate, I'm sure. And hopefully, by working with everybody, including Councillor Clifford, the trade, the cabinet member, and obviously the committee, maybe we'll make some progress. Okay, thank you very much everybody for your attendance. Have a good evening. I'm sure some of us will, some of us might not.